computer, and I'm broadcasting. Good luck, guys.
Thank you. Thanks, Lonnie.
Good afternoon, everyone, and a warm welcome and warm greetings as well from Centurion. It is officially our 20th webinar today, and I'm so pleased to see you all still joining us. I still remember the first one we did back in, I think it was the 21st of May, about navigating telehealth, and how nervous I was. Dion, I think you said the same to me just the other day. Yep. But I think slowly we all got used to using a digital platform to do these webinars on and feel more comfortable with this medium as well. I know in sort of historically, when I used to do a lot of presentations, you always get feedback from a live audience. But this is different. I only receive questions, we get a few chats, we get a few hellos. Thank you, Michael Lowe, I think the first one coming in there. A few waves as well. So, but I think the fact that 20 webinars or 20 weeks later, we've still got such a big audience with us, it means that we're doing something right, I hope at least. But enough about us, more about you. I can definitely tell you that we've got well over 700 people that registered for today's webinar again. We've got 17 disciplines. Let's start somewhere random. I'm going to share some numbers with you. There's 10 social workers, 7 chiropractors, 26 optometrists. We've got 25 podiatrists, just less than that, 20 medical orthotists and prosthetists. There's 29 registered counselors. We've got 32 dietitians with us, 61 speech and audiologists. We've got 39 bios, and then it goes up to 76 OTs, 114 physiotherapists, and well over 200 psychologists. Just to name but a few, there are obviously some of the other disciplines as well. As I usually do, just a quick reminder that you can view all our previous webinars as well as this one on 4 different social media platforms. I'm quickly going to copy the links here on my left-hand side, and I'm just going to post that for you in the chat functionality. So if you want to see it there, it should appear in just a second once I hit the enter button. The SpaceNet Global Group, thank you again for sponsoring this afternoon's webinar once again. Obviously, that is with the support from EZMed and Medici, 2 highly sophisticated and functional products that recently integrated with one another and became a first in South Africa for a practice management application system and a very secure telehealth platform to talk to one another. If you want to know more about either of these 2 products, please contact us at the EZMed.solutions website. You can get that address on your screens right in front of you. Our Dux Academy of Learning, or Healthcare rather, also managed to get this webinar accredited once again for 1 ethical CEU point. So I know you guys by now, and you're wondering, who's this new gentleman joining us today? And I'm extremely honored to introduce Hannes van Assweeven. Now, Hannes is the co-founder and the global group executive of the SpaceNet Global Group, and he's the director of Bioformis as well. And if it wasn't for this man, none of the initiatives that you see coming from the SpaceNet Group would be possible today. So I'm going to stop talking about Hannes, and I'm actually going to put him on the spot in just a second. So Hannes, you're laughing now, but just hold on to your horses there. Guys, I think you all know Dion. He's the director of ProfNet Medical and the SpaceNet Global Group executive for operations. And every week, I can tell you, I feel so humbled being in the presence of all our amazing guest speakers. But I am proudly a product manager with the SpaceNet Global Group. I'm also a qualified physiotherapist, and Dion as well. Anyway, Hannes, are you ready for me? Are you ready for me and Dion? And to address all of our 700 people that registered for the webinar this afternoon.
As they say, Lani, flattery will get you anywhere, so good job.
I learned that early on in life. Listen, guys, welcome, and let's just have fun this afternoon and have an open and a very interesting conversation. Cool. Hannes, I'm going to start by you, and I want to ask you, please tell us a little bit about the humble beginnings. How did SpaceNet start? What was your involvement from the beginning? And which road did you choose to take with this company to where it is today? And we know today it is a leading company who's actively addressing efficient healthcare through coordinated systems. Give us a bit of info.
Thanks, Lani. Yeah, it was 1st of July 2002 that we officially got the ball rolling. We had one or two individuals that was involved part-time at SpaceNet back then, but that was the day that we started a full-time company to help medical specialists. Just at that point in time, the managed healthcare just entered the South African market, and there was so much conflict between the specialists and the funders, and it was quite a tricky environment. So I was in the pharmaceutical industry before then, and we used to take medical specialists to conferences for continued education, etc., and spend a lot of time with them. And the one thing that we kept on hearing from them was the frustrations that they were experiencing. And long story short, we started the company to help specialists. That was 18 years ago now, and through the years we learned a lot. We got to a point where we realized that what we were doing was great for a couple of guys, but we had to build systems, and we got involved in IT, and we built VeryClaim. The MediCharge the MediCharge company was established, and we built VeryClaim, which is now the biggest medical practice management system for medical specialists. And through the years, we just realized that we're building up a lot of intellectual property around healthcare. We're not clinical people, so we'll never dictate how practices should be run or anything like that, but we understand the environment. We understand the frustrations, we understand the opportunities. And then about 5-6 years ago, we said, look, we still have a soft spot for our providers because that's where everything started. But the medical specialist is also not an island. Healthcare is an integrated environment. And then we took the leap into systems and processes, and we've just come to the end of a significant investment cycle where we've developed anything from medical aid management or medical aid administration systems to membership management systems to community hubs to EZMed, which is one of the products that we mention quite often on this system, hospital management software, etc. And our goal is to establish an environment where we've got transparency in healthcare, where we've got real-time integrated systems that talk to each other, that can make sure that patients are served better. Because at the end of the day, when patients are better, it's better for everyone. Better for the providers, better for the payers, and most importantly, better for the patients. So yeah, that's always been our focus. And yeah, we're privileged to be involved in what you guys are doing as well. From the company has grown significantly from the humble beginnings. There's a staff complement of over 300 at this point in time, but it's wonderful to just step back sometimes and see sometimes in awe what the team's doing. So it's fantastic to be involved.
Excellent. Thank you, Hannes. Dion, any sort of opening thoughts from your side?
Yeah, thank you and welcome to everyone. It's really great to be here again. Hannes, thanks so much for joining us. It really is great having you with us. And I think, when Hannes said 5 years ago, we were saying, specialist doctors aren't working as an island. I think what further complemented the strategy for the SpaceNet Global Group was that expansion to say, how do we focus and support the allied healthcare professionals or the other healthcare professionals that flank in and support the patient journey. And I guess that was the birth of ProfNet, ensuring that we're looking at the providers across the healthcare spectrum in coordinating that care to the patient. And we're seeing patients following a healthcare journey in South Africa that are touching multiple systems that are empowered by the SpaceNet Global Group. And that's the exciting part, is seeing how it all comes together. So, but welcome everyone. We look forward to today.
Excellent. Thank you, Dion. Before we kick off, if there's anyone attending today, you want to pose some questions, there's two platforms obviously that you can use. There's the chat functionality or the Q&A. Please drop your question in there. I will keep an eye on both, and so will Dion and Hannes. And if we see something interesting and then the guys know they can answer or help or guide you, we will definitely try and get to all of your questions. But the one word that keeps coming up between both of you are systems. And perhaps we can start elaborating on that word and try and pull that into a coordinated system. And today's topic of efficient healthcare through coordination of systems. Perhaps, Hannes, I can look at you and you can just start explaining what we mean by that.
I think the one term that we've been throwing around at the office quite a lot is digital ecosystems. And it sounds great, but I realize that not everyone on the call has been privy to our conversations, to their benefit. But the example I want to use is, Lani, would you mind if I just share my screen here?
Of course, yeah.
Let's get that done. I think it should be that one. Okay. The one industry that I want to refer to is the financial services industry. I think we all remember a couple of years ago when more people started carrying smartphones, not feature phones. We suddenly saw the appearance of apps on our phones and from the bank saying, "Look, this is our app, use it." And I mean, initially it was very rudimentary, but we all got involved in what we used to call e-banking back then is actually what we call banking now. So, I mean, just an example, if we look at this, this is a proper ecosystem. This is a financial services ecosystem. I'm an FNB client, but you can see I open my app, I can log in, do what I want to do contactless payments, buy insurance, buy airtime, buy Forex, do whatever I want to do. Everything from a financial services perspective that I require is at my fingertips. And the reality of the fact is that the time has come for us to, or not for us, the time has come for the market to actually just take that step back and say, what do we need to do that for healthcare? In the last 6, 9, what felt like 42 months of lockdown in the world with COVID, we all know what happened. We all know what the dynamics are that changed. And I'm not going to belabor that point, but the reality of the fact is that the dynamics have changed. And now is the right opportunity for us to say, how can we optimize the patient journey? How can we make sure we become truly patient-centric? We've got a multidisciplinary approach. How do we serve that patient best? And that's really what we're going to be talking about today.
Okay. Dion, Hannes touched on one word there, multidisciplinary.
I made a note.
No, you're sort of sitting more upright in your chair. I know your body language.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, there's all sorts of definitions. The other one that gets thrown around as well is the independent practice. So what's the difference? What's the overlap?
Yeah, I think just before I answer that, Hannes's example there, I was just reminded now when you put up the FNB app, is that in the initial stages when we still had feature phones and you had to press 1 for this and 2 for that, they were then talking about telebanking, wasn't it? And there's almost a word that doesn't even fit almost, but it was telebanking. So that, you know, the advance was that you didn't have to go into a branch, but you could actually use your phone and say, inquire about my balance and so on. And you had to push numbers for that. And we're laughing at that, but that wasn't very long ago. And there's been huge leaps and bounds on how we've moved forward in banking. And our expectations have changed as consumers. I think that COVID is going to assist us in that process of recalibrating and resetting the consumer's expectations. I'll talk a little bit later about our webinar coming up in 2 weeks' time. But it is about that consumer journey and what those expectations are. We reminded from COVID that why do I need to jump in my car and drive to a specialist who might be in the next town or city along when I'm looking for a consultation that might be managed through other platforms. So it's that similar kind of journey that banking has taken, where we're seeing health being moved into a new era of healthcare. And how do we embrace and coordinate that? But on the point of multidisciplinary, I think we all support that in that we have multiple different disciplines coordinating and rallying around the patient on their specific conditions and requirements. But the interdisciplinary approach is something that I'm most certainly very fond of. And the main difference really is that multidisciplinary is looking at the different disciplines that are sort of doing their bit to the patient, but not necessarily aware of each other. And that interdisciplinary approach states the patient is the center. The patient is in fact setting the goals and the kind of outcomes they're looking for in that engagement. And these disciplines are starting to knit together so that you don't have duplication of work, whether it's between a physiotherapist and an occupational therapist. I remember having an argument with an OT where the patient would go to one side of the hospital and go and do their rehab, and then come to the physio department, and then I would do rehab. And I think, it's probably worthwhile doing practicing car transfers. Little did I know that was just done in the OT on that side. So that was just an example of how we need to bring this together in an efficient approach of healthcare. And that interdisciplinary approach does that. It does break the medical model. It does move the doctor or the medical fraternity from the top of the pile to putting the patient and their family first, and then rallying the rest of the disciplines around and making sure that they are speaking to each other in a coordinated and effective way to get best outcomes. And there's evidence to actually support better outcomes and less cost when one moves from multidisciplinary to an interdisciplinary. And it's that concept that we will continue to empower through our systems and processes.
So I'm just looking at an interdisciplinary team, let's call it that. Where do you say they fit into an ecosystem? And perhaps before you answer where they fit in, can you perhaps explain to us what is an ecosystem? How do you see an ecosystem functioning in healthcare?
Sure,
it's actually interesting. Maybe let me just share that screen again. We did some research and found this article from 2013, which was done by Michael Porter. And this is what they were talking about. In 2013, they said the strategy that will fix healthcare. So that was the strategy. And now suddenly we're at a point where we're starting to do. Sorry, someone's looking for me on my office phone. And I don't know how to unpack but anyway, and you can see that the key thing that they mention here, and this was actually done in 2013 when people were mainly office based. So you were based at a specific site, and the key thing there was organizing into integrated practice units. That what we've just discussed. I stand corrected on my multi. I shall now be the discipline. But that's the reality. The more focused you've got individual clinicians around a medical condition, the better. Because then when a patient enters, this is very patient-centric. The patient is treated in the appropriate fashion. We take lower back pain as an example. If you look at the different avenues that a patient enters the system with lower back pain, that could be from a physio, via GP, via a biokineticist, via orthopedic surgeon. And wherever that patient touches first, that would definitely influence the end result and what the end treatment is going to be. Is it going to be more conservative? Is it going to be more aggressive? And the key with this is to say, look, who is supposed to touch this patient? Who is supposed to influence this patient and treat them to make sure that they get better, quicker, as quick as possible, as affordable as possible, and what is sustainable. And what typically happens is, if you do the research in the United States on the IPUs, wherever the IPUs function, they faster treatment, better outcomes, lower cost, and then you see a significant increase in market share in that disease entity because people talk. You end up in a position where your neighbor says, well, I've got a sore back, or I've got this or that, whatever. You say, well, I also had, but these guys sorted me out. And next thing you know, they're coming, their families talk, etc., etc. So if we look at this specific diagram, organizing into an environment, now that could sound daunting, but technology has made that quite easy. Organizing in that environment, we'll get into one or two examples a bit later. Then measuring what's happening with that patient, measuring the outcomes. What can happen amongst healthcare providers as well is just benchmarking themselves. So everyone there knows, look, I'm doing what I'm doing in the most appropriate fashion. Then, of course, when you've got all that data, you can look into the different payment mechanisms and those type of things. But I think that's another topic for another webinar later on alternative reimbursement models, etc. But then if you've established that, you can start spreading that initially when it was bricks and mortar based into other systems or other environments, facilities, and then eventually into other geographies. But now we're literally in a cycle with point 6 there, the enabling information technology platform that points 1, 2, and 3 actually enables you to have a national footprint. It enables you to do what you need to do because we're virtualizing the experience. We've all spoken about Medici to the nth degree, but I want to chat about it again because the reality remains that if you're a healthcare provider and you have a passion for diabetes, be it you're a physio or whatever other speciality, this can enable you to actually build diabetic practice, no matter where in the country you are. I wanted to say world, but then you must just make sure that you're registered here to be able to still practice in South Africa. But the reality of the fact is that the dream and the strategy of 2013 is becoming reality in 2020. We needed the boost that COVID-19 gave us to just get there and say, look, let's relook. How can we reposition? How can we do things better to better suit the patient?
Lonnie, if I can add to that, just around the ecosystems, you know, there's many examples of where we've interacted with ecosystems already. I think Hannes gave that example of your online banking, where you go to one place and you can perform multiple functions, and where you're connected with various people that can provide the services that you might be looking for, whether it's an insurer, the bank themselves, even renewing your car license happens straight through that app, and you can do that all in one place. So that's that convenience of going to a space, if I can call it that. I think ecosystems sometimes sound a bit daunting, but it's a space that one can go to, a community hub, an online space that you can go to. This is an ecosystem right here. People are learning, there's knowledge sharing, there's CPD points, there's sort of questions and answers. It's a place that one can go to achieve what you need to achieve. And it's those ecosystems or those community hubs that we've used very successfully in providing solutions to different membership organizations, to the HPCSA, to the Nursing Council we're in the process of doing. So it's about bringing all the role players, the stakeholders really, into a space and saying, right, how do we actually interact? And you can just imagine the beauty of me joining into an ecosystem as a physiotherapist, saying, these are my special interests, and this is what I'm good at, and this is what my focus area is. And then at the same time, the ecosystem matching me with consumers who are requiring those specific services, and doing that in a seamless way, so that the journey of both a healthcare practitioner and the journey of the patient are all brought together into a space. And then not to forget the funder, not to forget the family, and all the different stakeholders in your healthcare journey, all being in one place. So you can imagine me being linked up to just the right person who can cater for my specific needs. A dietitian that we're looking for who's specifically got a low carb approach, which is going to be speaking to a specific condition that I might have. How do we actually handshake them and not say, well, who's the closest dietitian to me just because of geography, and let's hope that works and fits. And now I can find the right person, whether they're sitting in Gatsonder or if they're even sitting in another country where the regulation allows. How do we link that and actually match those? And that, I think, is the magic of the ecosystems, in saying, I can participate in that, and I'm being linked appropriately to the services I'm looking for. And that's the exciting thing. It's actually gone further than bricks and mortar.
I think a key thing about that is, as you mentioned earlier, of course, what we do is we make sure the technology is set up appropriately, the right infrastructure is there, the data is organized in the right fashion. They talk about data liquidity, that if you've got 5 different systems, the data can flow amongst the 5, so that if the physio and the GP and the prosthetist and the podiatrist and wherever they communicate, the dietitian, that data is shared, the appropriate data is shared, and there's no duplication, there's no double costs, there's a massive time saving, but you're being appropriate to that individual patient. You know what they went through, you know who they saw, you know what their treatment is. So you can be so appropriate and really make a difference in that individual's life.
So, Hannes, you mentioned data sharing, and obviously there's always the question about confidentiality. So none of the data will be shared without patient consent. I think it is literally as easy as that. And I think we need to start challenging all of us, because we still refer to them as patients. Don't you think we should start calling them people? And shouldn't this, because the person is in the center of this ecosystem. And who's driving this ecosystem? Is it the individual role players, or is it the person that's in the middle?
And what we find as well is that with this ecosystem approach, that's going to start changing language, and it's going to start changing mindsets, because you're going to have 2 streams. You're going to have your traditional sick care individuals who's in the traditional healthcare model that are already sick, and then you can also accommodate the entry of your healthy individuals that want to be preventative, that want to make sure they do not. They might be genetically predisposed to a specific disease, but that doesn't have to happen to them. They want to make the appropriate changes. They want to set wellness targets for themselves. They want to be better and healthy and fitter. And all of that can be accommodated if you're a triathlete, you can have your coach, your physio, your GP, and your nutritionist or dietitian. You can have all of them on the same platform, and that's the ecosystem for you. That's what you need. And for a diabetic, it's going to look differently. But at the end of the day, clients, consumers, people, we're all individuals, and at some stage in our lives we become patients, but we're all people. That's a reality of the fact.
Sure. And I think to add to that is we often, in our attempts to try and solve for the issues that the patient or the person or the consumer is actually facing, we tend to label them with the condition that they've got. So we talk about a diabetic patient, but and I think that's a very sick care kind of focused model. We need to be talking about that journey of that person. Yes, they may have diabetes, but we're not defining them by their diabetes. We're defining them by the goals they're setting for themselves, how they lead the team as far as what is required in their outcomes, and how that gets navigated in their personal lives, in their lifestyle choices, and everything else that goes with that. And I think it's quite a difficult thing to actually recalibrate our minds in moving away from a traditional medical model, in following that person's journey and actually complementing that with the skills that we have. And it's a slogan we have within the SpaceNet group, which I always love sharing, is that we say within our staff is that we equal in function, we equal in value and different in function. And I think that's such an important thing to consider when looking at the healthcare team as well, is that we're all equal in value. We bring different elements to it, and the function that we perform there is unique to our space. And I think that's really important.
Absolutely. So it's definitely less disease focused. I think that's definitely something that I'm hearing here, and more outcome focused.
Yes. Yeah.
But I specifically want to talk to you about outcomes, because I know a couple of years ago you were chairperson of a society. Whose responsibility is it to come up with outcomes, to identify outcomes, to write guidelines, etc., etc.?
Sure. I think that's important. And to Hannes's point earlier, we're building systems, ecosystems that actually empower that process. But we need to be empowering the right people to come into that ecosystem and to contribute where their strengths are, so that we can all complement this in our strengths. The societies and associations play a pivotal role as far as the custodianship of the profession, driving the strategy of the profession and representing that profession. And in that process, there's obviously a strong role to play as far as what are best practice guidelines, what is the evidence that we should be driving forwards as far as best practice goes. And where there's research required, that should be facilitated to say, well, let's try and understand this. But the beauty about these ecosystems is the data is able to feed back in a sort of a continuous loop process to say, well, with this type of protocol, we're getting these outcomes. However, if we change this, what do those outcomes look like? And so we work that journey rather than just looking at what is it costing for an intervention for a patient who's got a certain condition or a person who's got a certain condition. We need to be measuring the effectiveness of that and then reiterate back to say, is there a better way to do this as well? So I think the representative organizations who are duly elected by its members should be looking strongly and continue to look strongly at what best practice guidelines, what is the evidence, and then second to that, what are the outcomes that we should be measuring for this to actually determine whether this hip replacement was in fact successful or not. I think we often say, okay, so a patient has had the hip replacement, there's no complications, and they were discharged home, tick. But that's not why the patient came for the hip replacement in the first place. If they wanted to be discharged and be home, they would have stayed at home. They come in because they've got a functional impairment or they have pain, and possibly a combination of the two that is impacting on their day-to-day lives. So are we measuring that post-hip replacement and coming right back to the entire ecosystem, not just the physio or the OT or the biokineticist, but right back to the surgery, the hospitalization? How does that whole journey look, and have we actually achieved the outcomes we're looking for? And back surgery is a prime example of where we're not necessarily iterating that back to say, was this the best option for this patient at this point? Or was there a conservative approach that should have been considered? And when should we be routing them? Because there's obviously appropriate times that a patient does require surgery or doesn't. And how do we coordinate that and actually trigger that at the right and appropriate times for that specific patient?
And once again, if one establishes or enters this digital ecosystem environment, that is all enabled, because the key thing is for healthcare or for healthcare practitioners, for clinicians, to be able to have these conversations, to to be able to do that virtual ward round with your patients that you share and share the knowledge of your different levels of experience and your different fields of expertise. And that's really what's needed, because at the end of the day, it always has a more positive effect. Always is maybe a strong word, maybe let me say 99.93% of the time.
93.
So Dion, you were talking quite a bit about outcomes, best practice, guidelines, but what I kept hearing there is it needs to be measurable. So obviously you're going to capture something, and we need to talk about the platforms that you're going to capture that on. But before we get there, that data that you're capturing, who does that data belong to then? Is it the patients? Is it the healthcare providers?
Yeah, that's crucial. And I think obviously I'm sure we're all aware that the POPI Act has been enacted, and we need to be complying. Yes, we have got 12 months to actually ensure that we're fully compliant with that. But we should have, and we have for many years, in fact, pretended and acted as if the POPI Act is fully enacted. So on that basis, I think it's crucially important that we ensure that the patient data is protected, as well as the provider data. You know, there's times where one looks at databases and people are saying, yeah, but my name's, it's been anonymized, but I happen to be the only physiotherapist in a town. Well, then everybody knows that's my data, right? So it's important that we don't just frivolously say that we're removing names, because that doesn't necessarily anonymize the data. So we have to be careful about how this is managed. But very importantly, where should that data sit? I think when we talk about anonymized, de-identified, and aggregated data, where does that go to? It is my strong opinion that, again, the data should be with the representative organizations to empower disciplines to go forwards, to say, this is the actual impact of the intervention of occupational therapy when we're doing evidence-based practice with these outcomes. Because that puts the organization in a position to actually have meaningful conversations and discussions with funders, with patients, and so on. Right now, I think where there are leadership vacuums in that, or ownership vacuums in that, I think we all know where the data is being accumulated. Obviously, the claims data is being accumulated at a funder level and administrator level, but there's more and more an appetite that the administrators and schemes are actually looking for the outcome measures as well. And I think we need to carefully understand where we're putting that and where that goes. But ultimately, I think even our HPCSA conversations have been about whose data is that, and making sure that that's contracted appropriately when that data, should it be shared, is shared. Hannes, you?
No, I agree. And the reality of the fact is that if you look at all the different players in the environment, the one player that's got the most to lose and also the most to gain by being the party that starts aggregating this data and working the data together with the patient in a joint effort, it is the healthcare providers, it is the clinicians. Because at the end of the day, that's what you as a clinician need to make sure that you make the best decision for your patient. You can track how well that patient's doing, and you can eventually, going forward, utilize that data to say, look, when this was our workflow, when this was our protocol, this is the end result that we saw on this base of patients. With this outcome, this is the cost structure. Now, does that put you in a good position to secure your future? I'm not talking about people profiting extremely, anything like that. It's about saying, how do we secure the future of our profession? How do we make sure that the service that we offer is relevant and it's paid for appropriately? And then you can go and say, look, I'll take care of your diabetic patients for the next 2 years. And you've got information to actually start negotiating appropriate fees for that. So there's a lot that can be done with that. But the reality of the fact is just that if you as a provider don't start doing that and start working with your societies and whatever representative bodies you have, you're missing an opportunity. And you're putting yourself on the back foot, because unfortunately, that is the reality of the situation.
Hannes, I think you sort of touched on it a little bit earlier, that in these ecosystems, these coordinated care approaches, there is cost saving because we're working more efficiently. I think a question on many of our lips is, if I'm participating in these kind of environments and there's cost saving, does that mean I need to charge less for my services? Where does that cost saving come from? And what is that impact on me as a provider participating in these environments? Look,
the reality is the cost saving we're talking about is preventing duplications. It's preventing X-rays being taken 5 times because a patient didn't bring it with, pathology, all the different components, seeing a specific medical professional that does not necessarily have to be seen. There's so much waste in the system because it's not coordinated. So it's about the total cost of treatment going down, not the fees that can be charged by the individuals that are actually treating the patients. What this should be doing is going forward, it could be opening the door to say, well, what is the appropriate fee that we should be paid? But for now, it does not mean that you must be putting less money in your pocket at the end of the month. It means, how do we make sure we're efficient in what we do? We don't waste.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So one of you mentioned regulatory bodies or regulatory bodies, and obviously we know there's the Health Professions Council, there's the Allied Health Profession Council, but there is a question that came up from Neely about social workers. Do you see in this ecosystem that disciplines in various regulatory bodies can work together?
Most definitely. Once again, the question is, we're not treating a regulatory body, we're treating an individual. And what does that individual need? And what can we do as healthcare professionals? Who needs to be part of that care team for that individual? And that's and the system then activates that to ensure that the patient is looked after, or the individual is looked after to the best of the system's ability.
Yeah.
What systems? Yeah, go.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges, and perhaps where you're leaning here, is that obviously across regulatory bodies there's different regulation. And if I just use an example, like, well, let me not use examples, but you may have one regulatory body that says these two disciplines can in fact work together with another discipline from a different regulatory body. But the second regulatory body says, no, you may not share an entrance, or you might not share a reception, and so on. And I think that's a concern, because in twofold. Firstly, we need to be coordinating care across these, and there needs to be more conversation between regulatory bodies. We've seen some interesting moves by the Health Professions Council to engage with other regulatory bodies, as we saw in last week's webinar. And I think that's the way forward. So I've also been alerted just before this webinar from one of our members saying, are we aware of the HPCSA's position on multidisciplinary group practices that were in fact set up prior to them not allowing that registration anymore? And that's very concerning. We continue to put pressure on the HPCSA to say we need to be empowering and allowing for multidisciplinary, and that, I use your term here, Hannes, the title is exactly that. Maybe this is the opportunity to change that as well. But to in fact allow for multidisciplinary group practices so that we can coordinate. The evidence is there. It's best practice. It's putting the patient in the center and moving the healthcare professionals around that patient. So to me, it's gobsmacking to think that a regulator may be putting processes in place to actually stop this from happening, because it's really not a person-centric.
But that to me almost becomes a non-issue, because we're referring to virtual networks as well. You don't have to physically share a room or share an address or a postal code with the people in your ecosystem. I mean, that's again where products like Medici comes forward, and EZMed. And I think we need to unpack some of the products themselves a little bit, and let's call it tools for a better word. How can tools or practice management applications or systems help to deliver these necessary outcomes? Hannes?
I think if we look at the current, I see one of the questions asked is also, is anything like this available? And the short answer is all the components are there, and just watch your space. A couple of weeks in, you'll be notified of some significant advancement in this process. So I don't want to go down that route too far now. But the reality is, you look at EZMed. EZMed is a cloud-based practice management application, or practice management, patient management application that is patient-centric. So that was developed with a whole IPU concept in mind. That system enables the sharing of data in a POPI compliant, and we're also in the process of our HIPAA compliance for the US, as we're running a couple of projects there, that we have that we can share data amongst healthcare professionals with the permission of the patient. Add on to that Medici, which is integrated into all of these things, which enables the communication to the patient as well as to your colleagues through a virtual, either a call or a text message or whatever you need to do. And we've built several community hubs one being the HPCSA, and where we managed everything with regards to membership. We're now in the process of building the same for SANC, the Nursing Council. So all of that components are there, and this is about just putting them together and making sure that when the appropriate patient enters the system, through whichever channel, we're working on those. So we will be getting the appropriate patients into the channel, that if you're from whichever discipline or speciality, if you've got a specific interest in a disease state, that patient who suffers from that specific disease will be channeled to you. And it's all possible. All the components are functioning at this point in time. So it's literally just putting it together and saying, guys, we need to get to a point where we realize that moving or choosing a system to manage your practice, to manage the administration, to manage the calendar, to manage your billing, to manage your patient information. It's not just like in the past so that you can generate the bill and send it to the medical aid, be that through post or through batch or whatever format. This is about the future of healthcare. It's about making the right decision, because by making the right decision in which systems you use in your practice, that is going to give access to more and more patients flowing through the doors, and be those doors virtual or real, depending on where the patient is. But that's where the patient flow is going to be in future. And once again, that's a critical component of positioning for healthcare providers to ensure the future of the professions.
Hannes, I see there's a question here that I think ties into this carefully, Lonnie. I'm not sure if you're looking at the same one there, but in the Q&A, just our systems obviously being central from practice management, diary management, outcome measures and management of that, reporting on that, and what we touched on quite quickly, even benchmarking to say, how am I comparing to my peers, or am I getting similar outcomes? Where am I sitting here without exposing who those peers are? I think that all gives us an insight into where we are and how we can possibly improve on our practices. But there's another element here that somebody's asking, they've kept it anonymous, but what about AI, cognitive technology, wearables, Internet of Things, and so on? And I know with your bioformist hat on, I think this is something that gets you salivating. Do you want to maybe talk about how we can complement these ecosystems and patient care with these systems?
I just want to check, we're running this till 6 o'clock, eh?
You're not going to find it.
6 a.m.
No, the reality of the fact is the market is changing rapidly. We're partners in Bioformist Technologies, which is a Boston-based company. I'm not going to get into the detail of that, but the core of that company is saying we've got specific wearable devices, clinical grade in this instance, because we treat specific disease entities. We measure the vital signs from patients. It's a wearable device you put you wear on your upper arm. It sends about 22 different vital signs via your phone into the cloud. That's put in a database and that's analyzed. That analyzes you against you, because the biggest challenge we've had up to now was population-based metrics. My heartbeat is different to Lani's, is different to Dion's. And when you need to start below, it's about 4 per minute. The reality is we're all different, and for you to really be accurate and to apply the appropriate AI and machine learning and all of those components, you need as accurate data as you can. So we measure you against you. A couple of days after you started wearing the device, we've established your physiological profile. And then based on your medication, your disease state, whatever, there's a variance in your profile. We pick it up typically about 14 days before, let's take heart failure, for example. A patient with heart failure, 14 days before they've got an episode in which they need to be admitted to ICU for, 14 days before the fact that the first flag is raised. And we say something's going wrong. We don't just look at one or two different variables. We look at the interplay between the different ones as well. So that stuff that's being perfected in the US and in Singapore at this point in time. We've gotten FDA approval for quite a couple of the projects that we're doing, but the key one that we're driving now is digital therapeutics. And we're expecting FDA breakthrough designation very soon, which which would just escalate the speed of the development quite rapidly, where we effectively, we look at the pharmacology of the patient as well. What medication is this patient on? And then based on that and the physiological profile, and then of course the clinical guidelines set by, in the States, the American Academy of Cardiologists. In South Africa, it'll be by the South African Cardiology Association. We use the appropriate guidelines, but that we can effectively start adjusting the patient's dosage of their different types of medication, because the stats show that about only 21% of patients with cardiac failure are being treated appropriately when it comes to the pharmaceutical regimen. So there's a lot of that happening. Some of that it will be a year or two before it lands on our shores, but we're actively working on that and seeing how that technology can be applied in the South African space. But that's one part, this purely clinical part. The other part is, we all know that Apple Watch has been FDA approved for heart rate and ECG. So there's no reason why that data should not be uploaded into the environment, so that at the end of the day, the appropriate healthcare professional can look at that. You don't necessarily need to show your psychologist how many steps you took or what your ECG is, but all of that could speak to a specific trait that you have, or specific behavior that you need to change. So once again, definitely looking at all these new technologies, wearables, that's proliferating. I mean, everyone's bringing out their own wearables. And the key thing is, one needs that patient-generated health data as well. Because at the end of the day, when you put all of this together and you can ask with the appropriate intelligence in the ecosystem, you can then say, what does this mean? So what? And who should it be presented to? That's the reality of the day. So whatever data you can put in the social environment of the patient. Do they belong to a specific church? What is their family situation? Have they got adult kids who need to also be included in the environment so that they can see how their folks are doing? Does this individual need a ride to their next appointment? I mean, all of that is AI that will run in the ecosystem that can enable that sees that John, who's a 72-year-old patient with multiple chronic conditions, he now has an appointment. He has to physically go and see whoever his GP for a consultation. Let's just use that as an example. But then the system can say, John, have you got someone who can pick you up, or do we organize an Uber? So all of this is reality, and it's easy, and it'll be driven on the patient's phone.
Sure. And there's even simple examples like a granny who's not near or in the same home as you, and she's typically moving around at this time of the day. Those are the patterns of movement, those are the patterns of activity, and suddenly something changes, and there's an alert that goes off to family members, not necessarily just to healthcare practitioners, to say something may not be right. Either granny is not feeling well, has decided to stay in bed, or there might have been a fall. We're already seeing on these various devices that there are fall alerts and so on. And all of that starts informing the relevant parties to take action on, isn't it?
Can I maybe just address one other question that I saw up there? Whatever patient refuses to become part of it. I think the 3 E's of digital ecosystems is, you need education. It's critical that patient is educated to understand why. They're educated to understand that if I share my data, it will be shared amongst healthcare professionals. If the patient then decides they don't want to be part of it, they don't want to be part of it. It's one of those things. Life goes on. It's not your responsibility as a healthcare practitioner to force to convince everyone to be involved in this. But if they're educated and the system is developed in the right fashion, it's developed appropriately to get engagement, you see significant empowerment of this individual, because suddenly they sit with the appropriate information in the palm of their hand, and they can start feeling that they own this, they own themselves, they own their body, whatever's going on inside of them. They've got the ability and the network, the whole infrastructure. They've got the world behind them. They just need to say, I need this now, and it happens. And it happens on a call, it happens on a WhatsApp, and that's the picture we should be painting to our patients. We need to inform them that this is the end result. This is why you want to do this. If you don't, that's fine. we all still have a mom or a dad or a grandpa or a grandma who still writes checks. You're still going to find them. But the majority of us are on our phones. So that's life. You're not going to convince everyone.
Absolutely.
Dion, anything else to add there? Because I've got one question.
No, I think that's succinct, and I guess again, it's an enabling environment that has willing participants to participate into that space, and to link up the right people with the right people so that we can get the right outcomes. So yeah, it's I think it's the enablement that is the most important part, and how do we actually provide what I see in a lot of the articles, actionable insights. What insights can we pull from the data, from the activities that actually result in actions that are required for that in order to meet the healthcare requirements and the well-being of people?
Mm-hmm. Something just came to mind is in my sort of past experience, very often healthcare professionals told me they're very scared joining a team of people, whether it's the same discipline or numerous different disciplines. They're scared they're going to lose patients to other healthcare professionals. Now, would an ecosystem like this promote footfall, appropriate footfall, let me call it that, or do you think people are going to lose patients? Because patients equals income at the end of the day for a healthcare professional. And I think there's a real concern out there.
Yeah. Look, the reality of the fact is I'm gonna use a stat that we got from an engagement with the group the last couple of weeks. I'm not going to get into specifics, but at this point in time, there's a flow through one medical aid in South Africa of 1,000 new diabetic patients per month. 1,000 new patients per month. Of them, the number of patients who've seen a dietitian. Now, if there's one thing crucial to a diabetic, it's eating right and getting someone to guide you through that change. It's less than 5%. So the reality of the fact is there's so much opportunity out there that if we do this right, if we focus where we in our areas of expertise, if we stay in our lane and we do what we need to do, there's more than enough patients. The problem is not patients. The problem at this point in time is access. And the problem is having a patient that's so overwhelmed. Because now imagine in many patients' minds, diabetes feels like a death sentence the moment they hear that. So they don't say you have diabetes, you are now a diabetic. So the next day you're on the call with your medical aid, and it's chronic medications, and you suddenly part of the disease management program. So now you are a disease because you're being managed by them, and it's just overwhelming. I'm overinflating this, but you get people who react to this like that. Then you're told you have to see a dietitian, you have to see a biokineticist, you have to see a physio, you have to see all of these. And you know what? When you get a leg ulcer because you're diabetic, then make sure you get to the wound care nurse quickly. That just becomes too much. So when we structure this appropriately, when we've got the appropriate protocol and workflow, we help that patient maybe day one start exercising. Exercise for a couple of days, a week or two, start to feel better. Then your dietitian, suddenly if you open your app, the dietitian icon is flashing. You click on that and says, okay, you're feeling better. How do we take the next step? Here we go, bite-sized chunks. But everyone has the input that they need to give into that specific patient's life.
I know someone asked you, and rightly so, you only mentioned one of the 3 E's, and that was education. What's the other?
It's engagement and empowerment. So yeah, if they're educated on why they're doing what they're doing, they will engage. And the platform is being developed in such a fashion that it is an engaging platform. And then that's the empowerment part, is where I said the patient then feels on top of the world, because they start taking ownership of themselves and then go forward from there.
Thank you. I hope that answers your question there. I think it was anonymous. I can't see the question now anymore. I'm watching the clock, guys. Dion, anything from you, and then we need to start wrapping up.
Yeah, no, I think we've covered quite a lot. We can obviously continue the conversation in a lot more detail. We are excited about sharing with the market on the empowering platforms that are imminent to empower these processes. But I think it's essential that we start looking as healthcare practitioners on various ways that we can contribute and be part of these the direction into a new healthcare ecosystem. And that we look at that outside of the traditional medical model and possibly even outside of the current funding model that we are so used to. We're so used to that, and even as consumers, as a patient myself, or as a person accessing healthcare myself, when I go to that, my first question is, well, does my medical aid cover this? And if not, then I might move to a position and say, well, if they're not going to pay for it, then perhaps I don't engage. I think we must be sure that we start exploring alternative funders for taking care of people's health, and not wait until they're sick. And that can include employers, that can include the patients themselves. We need to think differently about this. And we're going to continue this conversation in 2 weeks' time, so that we can just keep unpacking that. And we'll talk a little bit about who that is in a minute.
Excellent. But before we start wrapping up, attendees, I've got a question to you. I'm going to launch a poll, just one question. And we want to know, would you consider changing your practice management and or telehealth software if you could form part of a focused network with access to an identified group of patients in need of healthcare management? So it's a quick and easy one. I'm just going to launch it, and it's purely a yes or no answer if you don't mind just quickly dropping us your answer there. I'm going to let that run for a second or two. I can't believe I actually just asked the co-founder of the company that pays my salary to stop talking. But
not at all.
But Hannes and Dion, we have run out of time, but what an interesting conversation. I'm hearing it's not about sick care, it's about healthcare. It's not necessarily patient-focused, it's person-focused and person-centric. And that all of this needs to happen in a health ecosystem, which consists of numerous role players, including all the healthcare professionals and the disciplines that joined us today. Hannes, I'm going to ask you in 1 minute just to summarize for us today. But first, I'm going to ask Dion to tell us about our following webinar, which is taking place in 2 weeks' time. But attendees, please remember that next week it's Heritage Day on Thursday, so none of us are going to be here. I do expect all of you to have a little braai on the side, even record yourself doing the Jerusalema, according to your president. I added the braai bit, but just have fun and have a well-rested and a well-worth downtime as well. But on the 1st of October, we really want to see all of you back here. Dion, perhaps you can tell us what is happening on the 1st of October when I'm ending the poll session here. There you go.
Thank you, Lonnie. We're very excited. We've been engaging with various role players to see how we can empower these type of ecosystems. And one of the key thought leaders in this space is Professor David Siegel. Professor Siegel is at Wits. He's a pediatric endocrinologist, and he's also the chief medical officer at Guidepost. And he's been very gracious to accept an invitation to join us for our webinar in 2 weeks' time on the 1st. That's going to be entitled Improving the Healthcare Consumer Experience. And you can see how that ties into our conversations today. How do we follow the actual consumer's journey and improve that experience as they seek healthcare? So we're really looking forward to having Prof. Siegel here with us.
Definitely. So please, if you want to register, no, not if you want to, you are going to register for the next webinar, which is happening on the 1st of October. It's on the EZMed.solutions website. Hannes, I'm looking at you for a last pearl of wisdom.
Thanks, Lonnie. I'm gonna steal the words of Brian Rogers. He's the chairman of T. Rowe Price. It's one of the big asset management firms in the US. They've got over $1 trillion that they manage. But in the 2008 financial crisis, he said to his team, he said, the world doesn't just end that often. We will get through this, but life will be different. So the world didn't end. COVID happened. Thank the good Lord, we're in level 1 now. So hopefully soon this will be a memory. But the reality is life is going to be different, but how can we make that different to the better for our patients and ourselves? And we truly believe this is one of the avenues that one can do that. But thank you very much for your time. Thank you to everyone who joined us. It's really humbling to see all the comments, and we're glad to see that this touched a nerve, sometimes positive, sometimes negative. But let's get talking, because if we don't talk, we're never going to make a change.
Absolutely. Hannes, I think you mentioned 2 articles during today's webinar. Is it okay if I share those links with the attendees? So I'm going to do
Sure.
that now. I'll post it in the chat functionality if anyone wants to just copy those, and you get access to both of those articles that Hannes mentioned previously. But
sorry, I didn't mention the second one. It's McKinsey did a white paper on healthcare ecosystems, which they published in June 2020. So that's the one, and the other one is a 2013 article from Michael Porter.
Michael Porter. Perfect. So they're both in the chat functionality. Hannes, Dion, thank you again. Thanks for sharing your passion for this industry and the people, all the healthcare providers that are on the webinar with us today and who forms part of this. It's been an absolute pleasure hosting you as well again today, and we hope to see each and every one of you back on the 1st of October. And I honestly pray that level 1 will be kind to you. I'm sure it will be if you are kind to it and those around you. Please do take care, be safe, and I'll see you in 2 weeks' time. Good night.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Lonnie.